Hello, and welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast, where we chat with experts, executives, and business leaders to uncover the stories of challenge, success, learning, privilege, and what's coming down the track in our evolving world. With a focus on gender balance, we'll discuss big ideas, connect strategies of best practice, and celebrate the rising leaders ready to take us into the future. So for today's episode, I'm your host, Dr. Lou Atkinson, and I'm delighted to be able to speak to our guest today about a topic that's currently inspiring interest, investment, and quite a bit of heated debate across the world, which is GLP-1 agonist medication. So Dr. Renee Rogers, a warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to talk to you today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So before I ask Renee to introduce herself, I'll take a moment to introduce myself to any listeners who haven't heard me connecting my own personal dots on a couple of previous episodes. So if you do want the longer version of this story, you can check out season 1, episode 6 or season 2, episode 5. But I'll just give a brief intro here, and that way everyone will know why I've been so desperate to have you join me on this podcast, Renee. So in short, I'm a behavioural scientist, a researcher, an educator, and an exercise professional. And across my career, I've worked across public health, fitness, academia, and medtech. My own research and practice focuses on the psychosocial determinants of health-related behaviours and on developing interventions that aim to both reduce disease burden and address health inequalities. So really my aim is always to build, disseminate and apply the scientific and translational evidence needed to create real world change. And I work across fields including physical activity, obesity, chronic conditions and women's health. And along with a couple of decades now of research into the lived experience of people who are living with obesity, I've also designed, delivered and evaluated weight management services that have been delivered across healthcare, fitness and community-based settings. I've also had the pleasure of educating thousands now of exercise and health professionals with the aim to equip them with the skills, the tools and the understanding to work compassionately and effectively to support lifestyle change for metabolic health. I now work primarily as an independent consultant and scientific advisor, where I combine that cross-disciplinary perspective I've talked about with my sort of coaching mindset to help organizations to both maximize their impact and grow their business, whether that business is for profit or not for profit. So as you'll see in a moment, myself and Renee have a lot in common and we're very aligned on our interests. So I'm delighted to be able to start the podcast by saying, Renee, would you please connect the dots for us from your early career to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. And yes, we are like kindred souls when it comes to our pathways and the work that we're really passionate about. So yeah, I'm that odd pathway person in life, and I thrive on it. I think that it's fun for me at this point in my career to actually see things connect in a way that I never would have expected. But early in my career, or I should say career 1, I worked as a professional dancer. And I had a strong passion, of course, for movement and moving the body and the performing arts and all the things that come along with it. But I also had what I'll qualify as saying, an unhealthy relationship with my body weight. As an Italian-American woman, I have always struggled to maintain a healthy body weight through lifestyle alone. And for me, it was something that even in my dance career, being at the height of my career and doing really well, while I was performing exceptionally well, my body was not being taken care of the right way because I was using exercise for caloric expenditure. I was definitely not eating in a healthy way. I was doing everything that I possibly could to reduce body weight. So when I came to that turning point of saying, okay, is this a path that I want to continue to go down while I love dance and I love performing, I just really knew that this was something that was not sustainable. So I made the decision. My grandfather was a biology professor and always used to say to me, you love science, you're smart, you should go to school for biology and science. So I actually started to take science courses at the Youngstown, Ohio, where I grew up, and stumbled upon an exercise science program. Like literally, I was going to do cardio at the gym and I cut through and I saw the sign and I went, oh, are you kidding me? Exercise science, what's this? That sounds interesting. It's kind of close to dance, right? You're exercising, you're moving, even though I don't love exercising, which I will say this at the top. I initially in my career was the person that did not love exercise, and I am an exercise physiologist today. So I am that person in this scheme. I'm often called the anti-exercise physiologist for that reason. But it was one of those things that very quickly, as I started coursework, I fell in love with the notion that exercise is medicine. I just knew, and I saw this amazing thing, and it wasn't, yes, we were studying it within the context of energy expenditure because that's how we quantify what we do. But it wasn't just about weight loss. It was about seeing all these other amazing benefits. And for me, as someone that used to also teach dance and still do as a side passion to this day, I started to become very intrigued with where the biology and the behavior interconnected with one another, and how, the challenge of saying, wait a minute, we can get anyone to move. We're not handling this the right way. So I continued on. I went to physical therapy school. Wasn't my jam. It was too clinical, too same thing every day for a creative person that loves to, think outside the box. It wasn't for me. But went down that path, really got great clinical training, ended up working in a medical fitness environment with myself, a behavioral psychologist, and a dietitian, doing medical referrals, primarily for weight loss. Realized very, very quickly I didn't know anything about obesity treatment or weight loss as I thought I did. Really realized that the same idea of calories in, calories out wasn't the same for everyone. And again, won't say how many years ago that was, Dr. Lou. We don't want to give that away. But this idea of what we know now and where obesity treatment has gone is fascinating. So for me at the time, after working out in the field for several years and being humbled by what I didn't know, I decided to go back to school and get my master's and PhD with a focus on exercise physiology, obesity treatment as a specialty, and also behavioral, behavior and psychology training to support that, because I really wanted to think about all of it and how all of it comes together. And for me, as I was reading and researching, it just felt like that was something that we weren't seeing enough of, was that connection. So here I am today doing research at the University of Kansas Medical Center, focused on obesity, behavior change, and I also do, consulting work and applied work for really helping with some dissemination.
Fabulous. Yeah. And I've, had the pleasure of seeing you talk at ACSM and other events like that. And, you always draw a big crowd. But I think because you do have that very holistic perspective, we see so often with conditions like obesity, I think people have their specialism and they're seeing a slice of the problem. So I love that you immediately recognized that this was a complex condition and you wanted to understand it from all of those different perspectives. So, again, like a unicorn who can look at it from all of those different areas of expertise. So, yeah, I mean, as I said, we come together today because GLP-1 agonist medications are something that is garnering a lot of attention, a lot of conversation, from, again, lots of different sectors and lots of different perspectives. Would you do me a huge favor for anyone who's tuning in who isn't across this space? Could you summarize for us the sort of history of how these types of medications, where they've come from, how they were developed initially and tested for conditions like diabetes, and then sort of more recently for obesity and other applications? So could you connect the dots for us on the GLP-1s? Where did we come from and where are we today?
Yeah. It's so funny because they're garnering so much attention right now in this space and time, because really with the surgence of semaglutide and tirzepatide are two, in the US, the FDA approved medications, and they're out there, right? What we're seeing is the largest magnitude of weight loss that's getting very close to what we've seen in bariatric surgery, which is upwards of 25 to 30% weight loss with bariatric surgery, we now have pharmacotherapies, GLP-1 based pharmacotherapy specifically, that are targeting anywhere between 15 to upwards of 22%. And some of the new agents in phase 3 clinical testing are even getting closer to metabolic bariatric surgery levels. So we're seeing them now because the magnitude of weight loss is so great. However, we've actually been studying these medications for over 20 years. They've been around for some time, as you mentioned, initially for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. And yes, the earlier, what we'll say, the early generation or the phase, the first generation GLP-1 medications were not as effective as what we're seeing today with semaglutide and tirzepatide. In fact, liraglutide, which is a common earlier generation medication, is about 50%, of the weight loss that you see with semaglutide. So it's about 8% weight loss, 7 to 8% weight loss. And as many people know, and if you're not familiar, a really strong lifestyle intervention that combines dietary changes and physical activity. In usually mostly research settings, we'll see it this way, but even in commercial programs where patients are highly adherent, we can see weight losses somewhere between 7 and 10%. So you can understand why the medication really wasn't getting as much attention until now when they've been more effective. But yes, we have been studying them for some time. So it's always funny to me when I hear people say, we don't know anything about these medications. They're so new. And the reality is actually, we know quite a bit. These safety profiles have been studied for quite some time, and especially in patients with type 2 diabetes. And it's interesting because when these medications were being studied, especially semaglutide and tirzepatide, we saw it earlier on with liraglutide. But we noticed, yes, all these wonderful benefits from type 2 diabetes were coming out. Blood sugars were in better control. All these really great things were happening. But hey, look, patients are losing weight. What's going on here, right? So that's where it all started, in starting to look at these medications specifically for the treatment of obesity, excess adiposity, excess body weight, to understand what their impacts are. Since then, we are now seeing an array of things that these medications, these GLP-1, we believe it's the GLP-1, but there's lots of other agents being tested right now, pathways and mechanisms of health benefits, from cardiovascular disease to obstructive sleep apnea is now on the label. I mean, we're really seeing some wonderful things with these medications. And I checked it before I came on today, but what I can see from the pipeline is there's currently 127 agents in the research and development pipeline as of this morning. So this is not a space that is going anywhere.
Yeah, no, fabulous summary. Thank you, Renee. And yeah, absolutely. I totally agree that we've obviously been developing a range of interventions for a long time that have, as you say, been able to give us clinically significant weight loss. And tell me if you agree or disagree, but I think the future will still always include a whole range of different treatments, because GLP-1s aren't going to be the right treatment for everybody. So, this is just adding another tool into the locker. But yeah, again, for someone who's studied what it's like to live with obesity, what it's like to try to lose weight using lots of different interventions, whether it's lifestyle change, low calorie diets, bariatric surgery, some of the precursors to the GLP-1 medications that sort of, prevent sort of fat absorption in the gut and things like this. This definitely for me is a game changer for the people for whom none of those other interventions have worked, for really solid reasons, that are not to do with lack of willpower or, not being sufficiently motivated. It is about finding the right treatment for the right person.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you said that really, really, really nicely. And it's one of those things that, along with my colleagues, John Jakisik and Dr. Carolina Povian, we actually published a paper in ACSM, American College of Sports Medicine's Translational Journal, where we talk about, this exact concept of, in this new age of pharmacotherapy, understanding that it's not just this versus that, right? And for a long time, we did this with lifestyle interventions. Is lifestyle compared to metabolic bariatric surgery, right? And it was this versus that, right? And then as soon as pharmacotherapies came out, we saw the same thing, right? Lifestyle versus this versus that, or you hear people saying like, oh, you're not getting at the underlying root causes kind of thing, and statements like that. And to your point, it's not always about willpower. Yes, we all humans can benefit from moving more and changing our diet in a positive way. All humans, regardless of disease state, right? So it's one of those pieces that's interesting. But in that publication, we actually have this crazy figure that, has like 100 lines and arrows pointing in all these different directions. But the reason for that is to really demonstrate to folks that the pathway of a true holistic obesity treatment is not linear. It's not start with lifestyle, then go to pharmacotherapy, then go to metabolic bariatric surgery. It is a personal and shared decision between a patient and a provider of what's best for them, considering all of the things, right? Environment, biology, behavior, how they intersect, and how all those things come together. And in my opinion, and what I'm passionate about doing is tailoring and matching lifestyle strategies to partner with these medical management tools so that we're building the best chance for the patient, right? We're helping them with all the things that support whatever medical management pathway, whether it's pharmacotherapy or surgery or just lifestyle alone that they choose to go down, right? But the thing that I love and is happening more, and I think this is where the field, not only we're learning a lot scientifically, but providers are just so much more dynamic in what they're doing in terms of, maybe you start with lifestyle and maybe you go to pharmacotherapy, but we're seeing metabolic bariatric surgery patients entering the space of utilizing a GLP-1 for assistance with weight loss maintenance over time. So we're seeing this pathway of all these arrows going in all these directions and saying, you know what, it's not about this, then that, or this versus that. It's what does the human in front of us need right now? And this new space of pharmacotherapy is, again, like you said, another tool in the locker, another opportunity to help someone. And if we can holistically surround that person with the right lifestyle recommendations, wow, I think we can really, really make an impact.
Yeah, I mean, again, I couldn't agree with everything you've said more completely. And as you say, I think this gives us an opportunity really to challenge that narrative that an individual has to sort of demonstrate that they've tried everything else first. Because if we look at how quickly and how effectively someone's health risk can be reduced with a 5 or 10% body mass reduction, for me, I think there's a huge argument to say actually, if bariatric surgery is the right pathway for someone, actually give them a round of GLP-1s first so that the surgery is safer. The surgery is, they're more prepared for that surgery. And, they're likely to recover better from it because they're at a lower body weight and their cardiovascular and metabolic health is more effective. So they're going to heal more quickly. They're going to recover more quickly. And similarly, again, taking an individual with severe obesity, with multiple comorbidities, and saying actually, lifestyle change isn't going to happen for this individual until they feel better physically, they feel better emotionally, mentally, they build their confidence. And I think that's what's, from a psychologist's point of view, what's super interesting is how we are starting to gather that initial evidence about how people's behavior changes as a result of or concurrently, I should say, we can't talk about causality, but concurrently with taking those GLP-1 medications. So could you share with us, I know that's an area of research for you, you're, as you say, looking at how do you identify the right sort of lifestyle modifications for people. Do you want to just share a little bit about the sort of research you've done or what you're working on right now?
Yeah, no. And in that realm, it's so interesting because some of the early work we did as we entered the space, and I'm a firm believer that before you start intervening and overlaying interventions, which I'll be honest, and I think I've said this to you before, it really gets under my skin. Like, I am excited that the exercise world is embracing obesity treatment. Years have gone by where that's not been the case, right? It's been this versus that, like we talked about, And now seeing this evolution of wanting to bring GLP-1s into the conversation, it's a little bit, sometimes I step back and pause, because what I'm seeing a lot of right now is this overlaying of recommendations, like very blanket, like, okay, everybody's losing muscle mass, everybody's losing lean mass, you all need to start resistance training, here we go, 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 go. And I know you, it's like it makes my spine tingle in a negative way, sometimes knowing that no one's talking about the human or asking the human what's right. And so that's a little bit of my hesitation. So in going into this space and in working in metabolic bariatric surgery previously and doing research there and doing lifestyle research, I recognized and knew that this pathway, while we're all in the same camp of trying to treat the same thing, is different. And there are special considerations. And the human that is going through this medical management strategy has individual considerations too. And we can look at it based on a population to learn initially, but each human matters, right, in it. So when we really went down this pathway of trying to understand these contemporary pharmacotherapies, I wanted to explore how patients felt about them, patients with obesity that were taking them, how they felt and their thoughts on things like exercise and lifestyle and all of that, how it relates. And it was a little humbling. I had patients straight up say to me when I was speaking to them, like, if I knew, and I literally got the air quotes, if I knew you were an exercise person, I never would have talked to you. Me and my motivational interviewing was like, oh, tell me a little bit more about that, help me understand where this is coming from. And you hear things like, I see what's on social media, I don't relate to that, I've never had a healthy relationship with physical activity. And not overlaying myself on them, but really in that moment I wanted to be like, no, I hear you and I get you. And I'm not sure that happens enough. And I think even in our clinical recommendations right now and some of the early things that you're seeing come out, we have a lot of clinicians saying the same thing: eat more protein and start doing resistance training. Well, when I asked patients how they felt about that, and when we actually looked at that data and said, what are you doing for exercise? They're not resistance training. They're not doing it. And when you ask them why, they say, well, I don't know what to do. I don't feel comfortable doing this. I've never been an exercise person. And now you're telling me to go to a gym, start lifting weights, don't worry, just go in, they'll help you. For many of the patients that don't feel comfortable in spaces like that, we really heard a lot about, I'm not ready for these kinds of transitions, or I can't even, I've lost all this weight, I can't even balance anymore. I don't know where my body's in space. And I'm thinking to myself, and we're going to tell you to start holding weights and stand up tall and do all these things when you don't understand, kinesthetic awareness is lacking. So I think that, one of the eye-opening things for me right off the bat was, well, every patient that we worked with said, I know it's important. I've been told it's important. I've read, seen everywhere that it's important, but there's a huge gap between those that engage and those that don't. And that self-efficacy and confidence seems to be the largest factor in between. The other thing that was quite interesting is that they are worried about lean tissue and muscle mass loss. They're actually scared. Many patients told me, I'm scared the way that it's been talked to and all the things I'm hearing on social media. I don't know what to believe. And also many had said things like, I feel like I've been fooled by the exercise industry before. They're always telling me that my program's going to fix me. And, I don't know that I need fixed. I need support. And those are two very different things. So solutions versus support. So that kind of crafted my thinking around, where we were starting with all of this. And now currently we have clinical trials running right now that are examining actually specifically what's happening with the body composition on these medications. So we're mostly studying tirzepatide right now, but in general, trying to look at the difference between resistance training, very structured, highly quantified, fatigue training, a good rigid exercise protocol, compared to aerobic training, supervised, and compared to patients just taking GLP-1 alone, to understand what is happening to the body composition and also what impact to the different modalities of exercise have. And we are actually studying muscle mass. And that's one of the things that even in the clinical trials, the efficacy trials, they're looking at measures of of lean mass primarily. They're not actually measuring muscle, which is a little bit tougher to do, but we're actually going to be looking at that so we can actually answer these questions, which I'm super excited about.
Yeah, and I knew that you guys were doing that work, and I'm so glad that you are. I mean, I've been very open about the limitations of the evidence that we have to date from the clinical trials themselves.
Yeah.
Not just that the body composition measurements were done in a subsample, but also, as you say, not necessarily getting to the level of detail that we need, but also from a behavioral science point of view, we have no evidence from any of these clinical trials about whether anyone changed their behavior, and if they did, whether that was associated with different outcomes compared to those who didn't change behavior, all of those kinds of things. So yeah, we're in this world now where we need people like you and your colleagues to be able to do that work. And yeah, like you, I'm a big fan of qualitative research and speaking to people to really understand their experiences. So again, I love the work that you're doing, and I think that is an important message to get across, I think, to those who are looking to support GLP-1 users in the exercise space. I have lots of conversations with operators, for example, and people in that world. And I was actually on a panel a few weeks ago, and somebody was very passionately saying, these are people who've never been in our clubs before. And I had to correct them and say, actually, that's not true. The majority of them probably have tried it. Because these are, as I said before, these are not demotivated people. They want to lose weight. They want to be healthier. But yeah, they haven't found a place that they feel comfortable, that they feel at home, that's given them the right type of support. So it's not about these people are new. It's actually worse than that. It's that these people now have a negative perception of what it's like to be in a structured exercise space.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not just a novelty. It's actually addressing previous experiences, and we know, as behavioral scientists, that past behavior and past experience really dictates future behavior. So yeah,
I'm so glad you did that, because I think more people need to say that, because going back to that qualitative data we collected, I had patients across the spectrum from I've never been an exercise person to I had a horrible experience last week, or I've been there, done that. I've tried every exercise program out there. I've done the videos. I've bought the things. I've had the memberships. I've had trainers tell me that I don't need that surgery or that medication. So these patients, to your point, have experienced their previous experiences are something that you should stop and ask about, because every human is so different and so specific. I mean, to assume that someone's never exercised before, I spoke to a woman that used to be a triathlete,
Wow.
so for you to start talking to her about, oh, you've never been in a gym before, she's gonna be insulted, so like let's be real with people and recognize I love that you did that, and we really need to speak up about that, because yes, there is an opportunity to re-engage a proportion of the market that has maybe not recently participated in your gyms, or but to say that they've never exercised before is not always correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that brings us on to a really key area, I think, that the listeners of this podcast are going to be interested in. So, again, there's been a lot of chat around market opportunities. So, aside from obviously selling the drugs themselves, which we know is going to make the pharmaceutical companies a lot of money and make some physicians some good money as well, aside from the pharmaceuticals themselves, what market opportunities do you see arising from more and more people using these medications?
Yeah, it's fascinating. And again, it's one of those spaces that I sit back and I watch and I listen, and I always go back to asking, the consumer, right, the patient themselves, of their perceptions of things, to try to understand. And I think that so many things that are being branded around the medications right now are, yes, seems like the obvious opportunity. But for many of the patients that we're working with right now that are taking them, they remain extraordinarily skeptical. And it comes down to that standpoint of, again, been there, done that. I've tried that diet program. I've taken that supplement. I've taken that thing. And I think that there's been a real movement in the appropriate direction for humans living with the disease of obesity to be recognized as humans first and not their disease. And I think that when we're tagging things or tagging products in many ways as being GLP-1, there's patients, like, for example, I'd had someone the other day say to me, well, I went and got a smoothie and they have a whole new category that is, labeled for this. And when I ordered it online, I was mortified because when I went to pick it up, it had my name and it had GLP-1 on it. And for me, that was, I will never go back to that establishment again, because that's not something, that's my, like, it's like almost protected health information. That's a medication. That's a part of who I am, and it's a treatment, but it's not me. I'm not the medication, right? I'm a human that's working hard. I live with obesity and I'm trying to change it. The medication doesn't define me. So I think it's a really interesting time where, as we're seeing good intentions, I believe, to support patients on their weight loss journey and their obesity treatment journeys, it's coming across in a way where we're labeling something and we're losing sight of the individual, and the people that are living with obesity aren't loving it.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating for me. So I think that in an environment where we're trying to create things of support, we have to be extraordinarily careful we're not also creating labels and segregation of a population of people.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point, and I'm really glad you brought it up. This, as you say, this labeling and this stigma, and we know that a lot of people who are using these medications are keeping it to themselves, as is their complete entitlement. Nobody's entitled to your health information or any information about you. But it speaks to the stigma that still exists around, as you say, the condition of obesity. And I think it was really interesting that you talked about some of the participants you've spoken to being genuinely quite scared because of the messages that are getting pumped out in the media, whether it's by influencers, whether it's by well-meaning, people, or whether it's by companies who are trying to sell them something.
Right.
And we know that fear doesn't work as a motivator. If anything, it will push people away from your offer. So I think it's really important to get that message across that actually, we can't scare people into buying a supplement or taking part in our program, because actually they'll back away from it. They'll have the opposite response.
Yeah. It's so interesting, because the muscle mass one is really big, and even in the literature that we have, when we talk about lean mass losses, yes, we can say from the data that we do have that there appears to be a larger percentage of lean mass that is lost specifically on these medications. But we must be very careful to not also equate muscle mass and lean mass as being the same thing. Muscle mass is a subcomponent of lean mass. Now, even if the volume of lean mass is larger, it can be likely that the volume of muscle mass lost is larger. But as I mentioned earlier, we've never actually quantified that. Or if that data does exist, it's not really been made publicly available yet. And there are many new iterations of GLP-1 medications and combined therapies currently that are being in the development pipeline that are targeting this idea of helping to, I'll say, slow down the loss of lean mass. I don't want to say preserve, but those words are incredibly important. So we have to remember from that consumer market that if we're making claims, and I'm going to broadly use that word claims because that is truly what it is with no scientific evidence behind it. If we're making claims that we're preserving or stopping muscle mass loss, wow, that's really hard to do, because even in the best diet and physical activity programs that are out there that we've seen, lifestyle programs, there's likely still a loss of lean mass in patients that don't need it, that are carrying excess adiposity. So from a physiological standpoint, we're really stretching the line, there, even with the best programs that are out there. And I know there's someone's going to listen to this and say, oh no, we've seen it in our programs and I've seen it in my patients, and maybe, but from a generalizability standpoint, we've got to be extraordinarily careful with those those types of claims. So just this idea of saying muscle mass preservation when we've never even measured that is scary, but we've never really looked at the role of exercise on top of it. So I think clinicians are saying these things, as you mentioned, products, companies, we're hearing this being said, and it's a shaky ground, because as some of this new evidence comes out, all of a sudden we're going to be saying, wait a minute, we may find that the muscle changes aren't as bad as we had thought. And that, one of the areas that I love to study is it's not just about volume, it's about quality, right? Mm-hmm. It's this idea that, even if we lose volume of tissue, we can have the best healthy functioning tissue. And that's where some of these lifestyle parameters may come in. So the language we use is critically important, because again, like you said, people don't really respond to fear. They drop into avoidance mode at that point. And if our claims are truly wrong, then now look what's going to happen. And as I mentioned, the next iteration of these medications may just be taking care of that for us. So the focus of going back to support, not solution, may be actually the better pipeline to be thinking about from the market opportunity, is how are you supporting, not trying to solve.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, again, I think it's the conversations I'm trying to have myself with people working in that sort of fitness and exercise space is, I think I've been saying the same thing as you have, Renee, but just not in as eloquent a way, but basically saying, let's try and move the conversation away from what's wrong with people, right? And move it to what can I do to make this person's life better. Absolutely. So with physical activity, we've known forever in a day, not forever, but for a very long time, that if somebody who's living with obesity gets significantly more physically active, their metabolic health improves greatly, and their cardiovascular health improves greatly, and therefore their risk of serious disease and illness drops considerably, even if they don't lose a single pound.
Yes.
So, the benefits of physical activity are absolutely huge. Similarly, we see in the nutrition space, if somebody eats a really nutritious diet, cuts out some of the foods that we know are nutrient poor, and potentially toxic, they are going to feel better in themselves. They're going to have better mental health. Their cardiovascular and metabolic health will improve, even if they don't lose any weight. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think where businesses need to be looking at what can they offer. For me, I'd be happy if no one ever had a conversation about weight ever again. Now for the individual, that might be important to them. That might be their primary motivator, that they want to be a different shape or a different size, because society is telling them they need to be thinner, or, it's just their personal preference. And if that's their motivation, then, that's absolutely up to them. But I think the more we can move the conversation away from weight and more into how will whatever I'm offering you make you feel better on a day-to-day basis, help you to live a better quality of life, live longer, reduce your disease risk, all of those kinds of things. For me, and you can tell me with the reflection of the people you've spoken to, I think that's going to pull people towards products and services, as opposed to try and sort of scare them into taking something up.
Absolutely. It's creating these environments where people feel comfortable, that they feel supported, that they can trust, that it's not a push to sell. Because, just as we were talking about today, the markets, people they pay attention to investment, they pay attention to things, they watch the news, they hear about the market, they're thinking that this is a grab, that people are entering this space for profit. And I get it, it's business, it is what it is, but the consumer understands that too. They're seeing the shift of, all of a sudden you care about me, and that thinking of oh, now I'm important, right? And really the environment hasn't changed. And that's the thing, we can look at a lot of gyms that are very quickly overlaying programs, right? For the GLP-1 user, which again is we should be careful about terminology, right? Like that, you know. But these programs that are coming out that are very limited in time and scope and space, and, you know, saying that there's going to be an outcome in a certain period of time that we're not even sure we can deliver on, right? So what has changed about that environment to make that human feel supported? And I do agree with you wholeheartedly that as a patient enters, you know, a patient client enters a space, the body weight should not be the first question. It should never be assumed that that's why someone's there. Many different individuals, you know, allow them. We should be asking the right questions. We should be doing the right intake interviews. We should be talking about their interests and their goals and their health and well-being, because we run that risk of overlaying a heavy method-centered prescription. Like, oh, you're on a GLP-1, oh, we're going to resistance train, you know. Whereas I've seen many patients, even in our own pilot trials in the early phases, that have come in, been randomized to our resistance training group, because that's the way that research goes. And I would look at them with high blood pressures and, you know, other things going on, and saying to myself, you know what, this person would actually benefit way more if they had been in the aerobic group, likely. Because while resistance training may be this thing related to body composition that everybody's talking about right now, this human being's cardiovascular health could really use that exercise pathway, those exercise benefits that matter. So as we talk about all this, we cannot lose sight of that individual need of each human walking in, and not throw them into a canned platform. It's just,
Absolutely, yes.
so worried about.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good point. And yet, you know, we've got so many things that make up that individual. Like you say, it's about their individual health markers. Aside from weight, it's about their needs and preferences. And I think, coming back to the point you were making earlier on about how people feel about suddenly being told you've got to go and do, you know, resistance training, from a behavior change point of view, you know, behaviors are not going to stick unless it's something that individual develops their own intrinsic motivation for, right? So, you know, it actually allowing them to choose the modality with which they start their physical activity journey, or choose how they want to start modifying their diet and other aspects of their lifestyle, for me is so important, because they need to, as you say, build that self-efficacy, and we need to take them to a place where they have developed that internal motivation. Like, I'm doing this because there's something about it that makes me happy, brings me joy, makes me satisfied, you know, whatever emotion it is that's positive that they feel about it, rather than I have to do this because I've been told it's really important to get my outcomes from the drugs. And picking up on your point about short term, you know, it's something I talk about a lot, about how somebody's journey into a behavior, a long-term behavior, is going to be very lumpy, bumpy, non-linear, very messy, because that's how behavior change works, especially when, often in cases of these programs where they're getting the drug and they're getting a whole lot of other, you know, intervention, it's too much change all in one go. And they're dealing with real life. They're still real people with real lives who have families and care responsibilities and jobs and money worries and, you know, everything else that goes on in the world. So, yeah, I definitely agree. We need to be looking at this long term. We need to be looking at personalization, and we need to allow the individuals to be the one driving. What do I want to work on now? What is something that's going to wait until the future? Because, as you say, that's going to be the right choice for them in this moment, rather than forcing them into a box that isn't going to be something they can maintain long term.
And I think, you know, I love to use the term relevance a lot, you know, because I think in the behavior psychology world, we can talk about autonomy and all these things, you know, we use all of our theories and our terms and stuff. And I think, but in the real world, right, it comes down to what matters to that person, what's relevant to them. And I think that in a consumer market, right, we use the term relevance and we think about it from, well, this is hot, this is popular, this is the investor's relevant space, right? And that's where the GLP-1 gains the traction, right? But the relevance on the human living with obesity might be, I want to be able to go up the steps. I want to be able to pick up, you know, live and see my grandkids. I want to be around. I want to, do something every day, and just for 10 minutes. I want something that shows me a small win, right? So what's relevant to each individual human is really what we need to target as we develop programming, as we develop, operations and programs and systems, and even in gyms in our spaces that just really target that piece. And you're right, with each person, that pathway, like you said, it's lumpy and bumpy to behavior change. I love how you said that. I thought that was a really great way, and it's not linear by any means. And I think if we're truly recognizing obesity as being a chronic, relapsing neuroendocrine disorder, right, that is heavily biology driven, we have to recognize that, just like with type 2 diabetes, if we stop doing the things that help control the type 2 diabetes, it comes back. That is the same with obesity. So having these short-term solution-based products and ideas and programs out there is actually not acknowledging obesity as a chronic relapsing disease that you're here to support. That's trying to, again, overlay a solution.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that also speaks to something else from a sort of, a market point of view and a consumer understanding point of view, which is, you may be able to sell someone a short-term program or a product that goes alongside that time when they're on the medication. And we know some people will take the medication for a very long time, but others will use it and then come off it if they can. And so for me, from a business perspective, do I want a consumer who's going to be with me in the short term, like make a quick buck, but then they're gone once the medication part is over? Or do I want someone who's going to continue to engage with my product, my service in the long term? So for me, I'd rather have 100 customers who are going to buy my product from me every single month, compared to have 1,000 customers who are going to buy it once and then disappear. And I've got to keep finding new customers all the time. Going back to my very early business degree roots. But, that's a fundamental principle of businesses. Do you want to retain your customers, or do you want to have to keep finding new customers? And for me, that aligns actually very well with this idea of the support needs to be long-term. It needs to shift and change as that individual shifts and changes. And brand loyalty can be built with providing the right support at the right time. And as you say, not trying to sell them on some sort of quick fix, which hasn't worked in the past, and we know doesn't work in this space either.
And the diet industry has gotten a bad rap for it, and in this new agent space, as the initial impetus came out, okay, well, GLP-1s are going to solve everything. People don't need us anymore, was people's initial reaction in the lifestyle world, right?
Yeah.
Well, some people saw it as, hey, this is something that is actually improving my quality of life. And it's finding that comfort with this rather than something that I keep getting promised things that aren't scientifically backed, right? This has science behind it. So, it's finding that balance between, support versus solutions, and just really meeting people where they are. And I think that's where it's not as simple as a thing or a product. Sometimes it's really about what is around that support system. And I think some really interesting examples of that we've seen have been even in like the compounding GLP-1 space, which is wild right now, right? And there's so much going on with it, and so much debate. That could be a whole nother 3 hours to talk about everything going on there, right? But, when we see people getting access, and it's all about just getting access to something, that's one piece of the coin. But when you look at the data related to that, right, you don't always see, to your point, long-term adherence, long-term retention on something. But when you put the right support around it, suddenly, right, we even just with GLP-1 medications on, appropriate label use of medications, we see that patients are starting to stay on them longer with appropriate dietary support around it, with appropriate physical activity support around it, not just exercising, but actually support in the environment, right? So anytime we encompass things, which comes down to how people delivering interventions, your front desk workers are talking about, what the program is. They're using person first language. They're understanding that this isn't a sales, fat burning classes, right? This is really how we talk about it and think about it to gain that consumer trust. That's really putting holistic support around it, down to the label and what it says on it when somebody orders something or a service from you, or what comes on the box that's mailed to their house. Those kinds of things really matter to the person living with obesity.
Yeah, I love that. And actually that, leads me on to, I wanted to see if we had time to just touch on that area of where GLP-1s are being used by people who don't necessarily have a chronic illness at this point in time, whether it's diabetes or obesity or any of the other conditions that we're now prescribing GLP-1s for. So maybe they're using it as almost a substitute for lifestyle change. So, they're not yet living with a chronic condition, but they're thinking, well, this is a way to maybe prevent that chronic condition from developing. And also what we're seeing is some suggestions now as well that maybe people are going to use it either sort of microdosing, as you say, compounding, as just a way to get an edge, right? In terms of like mental clarity or longevity. So Brian Johnson, who I'm sure people will be familiar with, the sort of, longevity entrepreneur who's using himself as a N of one study, as we say in the science world. He tried tirzepatide for 3 weeks. He was going to do it for 12 weeks, I believe, because of the potential benefits that he saw. And he stopped after 3 weeks because he considers himself, and the data, will to a degree bear that out, metabolically optimized. So he found that actually there were some detriments to him because his optimal metabolically, actually it raised his resting heart rate, it decreased his heart rate variability, and it disrupted his sleep to small degrees, but that's what he's about, right? The small margins. But maybe if someone who isn't quite metabolically optimized, but also isn't ill, but they're looking for that edge, how do I stay healthy for longer? How do I, does it help me think more clearly? All of these potential benefits that are being talked about now. Do you have a view based on your really in-depth knowledge, of whether that's something we're going to see more of? What do you feel about that? Give us your thoughts, Renee.
I've been asked in the last year to speak at some of the anti-aging longevity, spaces. And so I was, to be honest with you, very surprised when I entered those spaces of how much these medications are being talked about and thought about. I also, have coming out of those spaces, have gone to a lot of my clinical colleagues, some of them that, have been a part of these drug, trials and who I really, really highly respect and have asked for their thoughts on it. So some of these are not just my own. They're really coming from just speaking to a lot of people, because I don't want to try to pretend like I'm someone that I'm not either. But I found it profound. And one person said to me, these medications are currently being studied in patients with type 2 diabetes and patients with excess body weight and adiposity. And all the things that we're learning are really around that. We're starting to study them in other chronic conditions as well, and we're seeing benefit. And I think that in anything that's out there, and we've seen this with other medications, and even just with even exercise and changing the diet, right? Patients that are worse off metabolically have the most benefit when you add the tool to it. So I think that we have to remember that what we know now from the really good safety trials, rigorous clinical trials, and that the ancillary and the new ones that are coming out, like the ones that we're working on and other colleagues all over the world and country, they're being studied in a specific population. Until we study that in a healthy population, and until we really study microdosing, I think we're making assumptions, we're making guesses, right? We're basing things off of an N of one, and realizing that even in those clinical trials where we have learned a lot, there's a ton of variability too. And to your point earlier, we don't know what they were doing for lifestyle around that. We don't know a lot of things around it to explain that variability yet. That's why all these sub trials are being done, to really understand that variability. So even with that, there's variability. So when we look at things from an N of one, we've always got to be careful. We've always got to, case examples. We also have to be extraordinarily careful that what happens in our own bubble of the space that we work, regionally in the country, from a socioeconomic status, from a social determinant status you mentioned, or even the people that we attract into facilities, right? Those are going to be somewhat the same and heterogeneous from the way that we market and the way that we target. So even the outcomes that we see there, we can't always think from that application. So that's where I always get really nervous when I hear people saying like, well, this is what we see, or this is what happens. And even the data from our own clinic that I, put, one of the limitations I talk about in my qualitative work is we do talk about physical activity. So that's a limitation in and of itself. These patients come in knowing and have a bias. So biases exist everywhere. And I think that until we study with really great randomized clinical trials, the healthy side of it, and then how we're using GLP-1s from a microdosing preventative side, we need to be really cautious, because they do induce weight loss. They can actually keep someone from eating. We've seen folks drop to levels where they're malnourished when they're not appropriately getting that support around them. So I like to say it's a little bit of the Wild West. We got to be careful about it, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, having spent most of my research career, very much at the applied end and the real world end, I to a degree, I'm a fan of, sometimes if we know an intervention is pretty safe, we need to put it out in the world and just, see what happens. And that's pretty much what's happening. People are taking it into their own hands and figuring it out for themselves. But yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because that was my perception as well, is that this has never been tested rigorously in a reasonably powered, properly controlled trial in a healthy population, to the best of my knowledge. And so yeah, I think that there could be a huge potential for preventive health, because we see how it impacts on metabolic or cardiometabolic markers in our people with chronic conditions. But yeah, we don't know whether that's worthwhile in the long term, in terms of a cost perspective. You don't want people to invest their money, or for healthcare systems to invest money, if we can't be sure that it's going to pay off in terms of the benefits that somebody's going to get. And I think side effects and, as you say, the long-term safety of it isn't, my biggest concern, because, these are very well studied drugs. As you said, they've actually been studying them for a very long time. It's more that, again, are we going to sell people on something that isn't really going to give them the benefits that they think it's going to have?
And I think a bigger problem, that we face right now is for the patients that do need the drugs. Access, affordability, our healthcare systems around the globe, truly, and how, I know in the UK it's different from the United States, but I've talked to advocates in the UK too that have talked about, access is a thing. Everybody's not getting access, or some providers don't know how to support, to titrate, all the things that we're talking about. So I think there's, as we want to be in this space and we want to think about this space, we must continue to advocate for access for the folks that truly need it. And then we start to open up and expand and think about where it can go. And I know markets move faster than research always, unfortunately. I wish we could go so much faster in what we do if we had more money.
Yeah.
Right? If we just had more money, right, to do that work, we could probably move a lot faster. But we're in the realms of what we can and can't do within the scope. But yes, markets move faster than research can, but we've got to find the balance of, once we know we have something, which right now we know we have something that is highly effective for helping patients with obesity, we need to make sure that they can get access to the medications that they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Health inequalities, as I said, has always been a big focus, I know, for all of us who work in the obesity space, because it disproportionately affects people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, from, marginalized ethnic groups, and people with lower education. So, we want to try our best to avoid this exacerbating those existing inequalities that we have. We could talk about this for ages, but I think there are so many great, real good nuggets in here. I'm looking forward to sort of pulling out some of the key points when we wrap up. But what's next for you and your research? What's exciting you now?
Yeah, I mean, we're really, really super excited about this newest trial that I already talked about,
Mm.
but I just genuinely, want to see some of this work help us to help clinicians, help, markets, people developing products, everything across the world to really talk about exercise and physical activity in this relationship in a more holistic way, so that we're not losing sight of it. We're not just thinking about it for, losing weight or losing muscle mass, or thinking about it from body composition standpoint, but we're actually thinking about it from a whole person health piece. So for me, in the work that we're doing, that's really the focus of trying to tune in and understand the role that exercise really does play in this relationship, and looking at it across, the landscape of metabolic disease related to obesity, from type 2 diabetes, across the board. But, as new agents come out, I'm excited to continue to think about this, because we are seeing monoclonal antibodies, myostatin inhibitors coming out that are preserving some of the tissue. And I'm dying to know, even if we preserve tissue, what does that mean for quality and strength and fitness and muscle health? So I love it. I love that it's changing every day, and it's an exciting path. But I think for me professionally, continuing to be a part of conversations like this, where we can think outside the box and bring the science to life, is so exciting. And I love educating fitness professionals and clinicians and even patients on being an advocate for themselves in this space, and feeling as though they are important in this conversation as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I for one, I'm going to be the first one to want to read that paper when it comes out, so we can get some really solid science around what's happening. And I'm sure you're going to continue to lead the way in that area. So the last question we ask all our guests in our attempt to connect all the dots one last time is: who would you like to spotlight as an emerging female leader that we should all know about, whether they're in your field or in somewhere else? Who is it that we should all be taking notice of, because they're doing something really incredible right now?
The first amazing woman that comes to mind is Dr. Catherine Saunders. And she is an obesity specialist. She's at Weill Cornell, and she also is one of the creators of Flight Health. And her whole world is in obesity care, but also they've really looked to create access for folks to get high level holistic obesity care. And she is an amazingly passionate, compassionate, empathetic provider. But I think her and her partner have created an amazing company that I think is really doing amazing things in this space. So Dr. Catherine Saunders, pay attention to her. She's wonderful.
Fabulous. We will make sure that we spotlight her in the show notes of this podcast. And if we get the chance to talk to her on a future podcast, that would be awesome. So yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Renee Rogers. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we will all watch with bated breath as you continue to break new ground in this area.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Thanks for tuning in to Connecting the Dots. If today sparked a new idea, helped shift your thinking, or gave you something to take forward, share it, rate the show, or drop us a message. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation. Until then, keep connecting the dots that matter.